"Excuse me, but this clause is a trap." The voice, clear, calm, and uninvited, cut through the sleek hush of the 30th floor boardroom like the sudden crack of glass under weight. Heads turned slowly, as if unwilling to believe the words had come from the girl standing at the door, small in frame but impossibly composed, her deep red blazer slightly oversized, her sneakers borrowed, and her badge, custodial visitor, temporary, hanging askew on her lanyard like a question no one had prepared to answer. Stephen Langford's pen paused mid-air, just inches above a document embossed in gold leaf. For a man who had built a reputation on remaining unshakable even as markets swayed, his face now betrayed a flicker of something deeper than confusion. Recognition. The others, his legal counsel, the junior executives, his wife Jillian, stared in a stunned silence that stretched uncomfortably long, as if waiting for someone else to speak first. But no one did. Naomi Carter stepped forward, slowly but deliberately, eyes never leaving the document. Her voice did not rise, she simply pointed. Page 13, subsection C, the indemnity clause. The tension in the room shifted, not with panic, but with a new and unfamiliar weight, like a family secret aired aloud during supper, when no one could pretend they hadn't heard. Carter Drew, the out-of-town businessman with polished charm and a lawyer's drawl, let out a dry, practiced chuckle. "I beg your pardon, young lady," he said, his tone sweetened by condescension, the way some men say darling before offering insult. Naomi didn't flinch. "If you sign that contract as is, sir, Langford Capital assumes full liability for all post-merger complications. Legal, financial, criminal if it comes to that. Drew Holdings walks away clean." The room held its breath. Someone, one of the legal aides, barely out of law school, slid the document closer, flipping to the page. Another tapped a tablet nervously, scanning the lines Naomi had named. Gillian Langford's jaw tightened before she spoke. "Stephen," she said with a forced smile. "She shouldn't even be in this room. She's the janitor's daughter." Stephen did not respond. He was still staring at the document, his brow furrowed in quiet concentration, as if realizing, perhaps too late, that he had nearly signed away more than just equity. Naomi stood straight, her voice no louder than a prayer whispered through closed doors, but it carried. "I'm sorry to interrupt, sir, but I thought you should know before it's too late." The room didn't move, time felt suspended, and somewhere inside that stillness, something old began to crack. Something called certainty. Long before Naomi Carter stood in that glass-walled boardroom with every eye fixed on her as if she'd trespassed into a world meant to remain undisturbed, her place in the building had always been one of silence, of invisibility, of routine so practiced it became indistinguishable from the hum of the fluorescent lights. Her mother, Camille, had worked the night shift at Langford Capital for 8 years and 3 flu seasons, polishing marble floors, wiping down walnut conference tables where mergers were whispered into existence, and emptying trash bins full of disposable secrets. They lived in a second-floor apartment above a Jamaican bakery off Auburn Avenue, where the scent of fried plantains clung to their curtains and the radiator hissed in winter like an old man complaining about the world. Naomi was 15, too young to be bitter and too observant not to understand the way people saw her mother, and by extension, her. When Camille walked into buildings, people looked past her. When Naomi spoke, people listened with a kind of strained patience, the way one listens to a child explaining how the sky works. But none of that mattered much to Naomi, because while the world dismissed her, she had found ways to listen when no one thought she was there. She liked numbers more than music, stories more than screens. Her idea of a perfect afternoon wasn't TikTok or mall trips, but curling beside her grandfather on his cracked leather armchair while he read to her from a yellowing hardcover titled Understanding Corporate Fraud, a Guide for Auditors. He'd been a CPA before a stroke slowed his speech and shuffled his gait, but his mind remained sharp, and Naomi, barefoot and cross-legged, absorbed everything he taught like a sponge that didn't know it was supposed to be dry. Naomi had always been curious about things people left behind, Sometimes it was a lipstick-stained coffee mug or a post-it note stuck to a monitor. But that night, when she found the folder on the tray of the copier, its tab labeled Final Draft, Langford/Drew Merger, something inside her shifted. She wasn't looking for trouble. She was looking for what didn't make sense. She flipped it open, not because she intended to read, but because reading had become a reflex. Her eyes skimmed the language. Boilerplate clauses, schedules, percentages, until she landed on the one paragraph that made her pause, reread, and then whisper aloud to no one, "This doesn't protect Langford at all." Camille had warned her, of course. "Don't touch what don't belong to you," she'd muttered, not unkindly, but with that weariness only working mothers acquire after cleaning the same boardroom for the 900th time and still being told she missed a smudge. Naomi had nodded, but didn't let go of the folder right away. She thought about what her grandfather used to say: the most dangerous lies are the ones written in formal language. By morning, Naomi knew she had a choice. Stay quiet and be safe, or speak and maybe be heard. She didn't know how boardrooms worked. She didn't know the proper way to enter one or the right time to raise a hand. But she knew one thing with perfect clarity. Someone powerful was about to sign away everything, and no one else had seen the trap but her. And in a world where the girl in sneakers is never expected to speak, Naomi Carter decided she wouldn't wait to be asked. They escorted her out with a kind of gentleness that insulted more than protected, as though kindness could mask the fact that what had just happened should never have happened at all, at least not in their world, where voices like hers were background noise at best, interference at worst. The elevator ride down was silent, save for the low chime of each floor, and Naomi stood with her shoulders square despite the heat rising up her neck and settling in her cheeks. The security guard didn't say much, just looked at her once with something between apology and disbelief, like he wasn't sure if she had just saved a company or broken some unwritten rule of where girls like her were allowed to stand. Downstairs, in the cold marble lobby with its corporate silence and polished banisters, her mother was already waiting, arms crossed, worry carved into every line of her face. "Naomi Elaine Carter," Camille whispered sharply, eyes wide, voice tight with fear. "What in God's name did you just do?" "I stopped them from signing something dangerous," Naomi said, and though her voice was steady, her hands, tucked deep into the sleeves of her jacket, were trembling. Camille looked around, as if expecting someone to shout, to arrest, to condemn. Instead, a woman from HR approached briskly, holding a clipboard like it was both shield and weapon. "Mrs. Carter," she said, not once glancing at Naomi, "you've been placed on immediate leave pending internal review. We'll contact you about next steps." And with that, the Langford Tower, once just a place Camille cleaned and Naomi quietly admired, became a fortress from which they had been exiled. That night, back home, the apartment was too quiet. The TV stayed off. The smell of lavender floor cleaner clung to Camille's uniform, even after she'd changed. Naomi sat at the kitchen table with a mug of cocoa gone cold, her books untouched, her thoughts spinning in wide, nervous circles. "You think you helped someone," Camille finally said, breaking the silence not with anger but exhaustion. "But what you did, you embarrassed them, Naomi. You embarrassed me. And in their world, that's enough to shut every door we've ever hoped to open." Naomi looked down at her hands. "I didn't mean to hurt you, Mom," Camille sighed. "I raised you to be brave, but I didn't raise you to be reckless." Naomi wanted to explain the clause, the subtle language, the trap so well hidden that even trained lawyers had missed it. She wanted to talk about how her grandfather had taught her to look beneath surface truths, to trace the shape of power through contracts and fine print, but the words felt too large for the kitchen, too sharp for a mother's fear. So she stayed quiet, until later that night, when the apartment had dimmed and Camille had gone to bed, Naomi opened her laptop and typed 3 simple words into a search bar. Marcus Lyle, Langford Capital, Audit. Because sometimes doing the right thing doesn't mean being praised. Sometimes it means being punished too. And Naomi Carter, janitor's daughter, boardroom intruder, and reader of things she was never meant to see, was just beginning to understand the cost of being right. The first reply came 3 days later, buried beneath spam and school notices in Naomi's email inbox. Its subject line understated, almost shy. I saw it too. The message was short, unsigned but unmistakably urgent. If you're brave enough to speak, I'm brave enough to listen. ML. It took her a full hour to connect the initials with the name from those old audit documents her grandfather used to reference, Marcus Lyle, the former internal auditor for Langford Capital, whose sudden resignation 2 years ago had come without explanation and was never spoken of again, like a chapter the company wanted to forget. Naomi didn't respond right away. Instead, she reread the message under the kitchen table, where she used to do homework as a child, surrounded by the scent of lemon polish and the low hum of the refrigerator, as if those familiar sounds could steady the quiet tremble inside her ribs. When she finally wrote back, her words were cautious but clear. I think they buried something and no one's digging. I don't want to be the only one with a shovel. That night Marcus called. His voice was graveled with weariness, but it held a rhythm of recognition, the cadence of someone who had once seen the monster behind the curtain and survived only by walking away before it turned on him. You're young, he said gently, and they'll use that against you. I know, Naomi replied. They'll say you misunderstood, that you imagined it. He didn't. Marcus paused, then exhaled. Then, I'll help. The next day, a package arrived wrapped in plain brown paper, postmarked from Savannah. Inside was a thumb drive, a printed timeline, and a yellow sticky note with 3 words written in blocky, almost angry handwriting. It wasn't a mistake. What Naomi saw in the files didn't require a degree to decipher. There were patterns too perfect to be accidental. Identical clauses repeated across 3 prior mergers involving Drew Holdings. In each one, the acquiring firm had collapsed under regulatory scrutiny within months, while Drew's name vanished from legal responsibility like steam off a mirror. What made her breath catch wasn't just the language. It was the authorization trail. One of the signatures authorizing the merger review had come from Gillian Langford's internal login. Twice. Naomi sat in the window nook of their small living room, the city lights flickering like distant answers. She didn't know what to do next, only that doing nothing now felt like betrayal. She copied the files to a second drive, placed it in a Ziploc and tucked it inside the sole of her left sneaker. Just in case. That evening, her mother came home late and quiet. She didn't ask what Naomi was doing. She didn't ask why the dining table was covered in printed contracts, or why Naomi's eyes looked tired in the way that doesn't come from lack of sleep, but from carrying too much. Instead, Camille placed a bowl of soup beside her, sat down and whispered, "They called me today." Naomi looked up. "They said if you keep stirring, they'll make it hard for you to finish school. Said there are ways to make records disappear." Naomi's hands curled into fists. "Then I'll leave a copy everywhere," she said, her voice soft but steady. "They can erase files, but they can't erase what I know." And in that moment, her mother looked at her not with fear, but with something older, something forged from generations of women who had endured much more than silence. She nodded. Just once. Because even when you clean someone else's floor for a living, it does not mean you do not see the dirt being pushed beneath the rug. And Naomi was done pretending not to notice. It was not a courtroom, not yet. It was just a private meeting room on the 29th floor of Langford Capital. Smaller than the boardroom, warmer, somehow, with sun filtering through linen blinds and the city humming low beyond the glass. But the silence inside that room held more weight than a gavel could summon. Stephen Langford sat at the head of the table, not in his usual confidence, but in the kind of stillness that comes when a man suspects the walls he built for protection may also be the ones closing in. Naomi Carter, 15 years old, wore a navy blazer too big in the shoulders, a blouse buttoned high, and her hair in a braid her mother had fixed that morning without saying a word. She held a folder in both hands like an offering. No arrogance, no apology. Beside her sat Marcus Lyle, face sharper than when he had worked here, like truth had carved away the excess, and across from him, calm and composed, Alyssa Monroe, a woman who spoke rarely but whose eyes noticed everything. Stephen looked at Naomi, and though he said nothing for a moment, the way his brow furrowed meant he remembered. Remembered the moment his hand had paused above the signature line because of her voice. Remembered the feeling of uncertainty she had left him with, like a splinter lodged deep. "What do you have?" he asked, voice even but not indifferent. Naomi opened the folder and began. Her words didn't rush. She walked them through the pattern. 3 companies, 3 mergers, 3 collapses, and each time Drew Holdings emerged untouched, floating free from liability like a leaf set loose on a stream already poisoned. She pointed to the authorization logs, the internal email metadata, the account numbers routed through Caribbean islands with names that sounded like vacation but meant escape. And then she placed a flash drive in front of Stephen. "There's an audio file," she said simply. "You should hear it." The file was short, just over 90 seconds, but by the time it ended, Stephen had stopped blinking. It was Jillian's voice first, measured, familiar, persuasive. "He won't question the clause, he never has before. All I need to do is hand it to him, not explain it." Then came Carter Drew. "And if he does?" A pause. "We remind him what he stands to lose." Stephen pressed stop. No one spoke. Outside, somewhere in the city, the wind shifted. He sat back slowly, shoulders lowering, as if releasing a weight he hadn't even admitted he carried. When he looked at Naomi again, there was no CO in his eyes. Just a man who'd been lied to by the person closest to him and warned by the person furthest from his world. "You saw what none of us did," he said finally. Naomi didn't smile. "I wasn't supposed to. That's why it worked." He stood, walked to the window, watched the light break across the skyline. And when he turned back, his voice had changed. "I'm halting the merger." It wasn't a grand declaration, just a decision, spoken plainly the way you say no more when you've seen the damage too closely to deny it. "Drew won't take it quietly," Alyssa said. "I'm not interested in quiet," Stephen replied, "not anymore." And with that, the room changed. Naomi's hands were still, her heart racing, but for the first time since she had opened that folder beside the copier, she felt something settle inside her. Not victory, not vindication, something older, simpler, harder to name. She had told the truth, and someone had finally listened. They offered her a scholarship the next morning. A formal one, printed on embossed stationery and handed over by a trembling assistant in the Langford Tower lobby, as if gratitude could be made official with gold leaf and a signature from the CEO's desk. Naomi Carter stood there, reading the letter, while sunlight glinted off the polished floor beneath her feet. Floor her mother had mopped for 8 years. And she read each line, not with excitement, but with a kind of quiet mourning, because she understood something the building didn't. Not everything broken can be bought back with opportunity. Later, in the CEO's office, where the blinds had been drawn halfway against the autumn light, Stephen Langford asked if she would consider joining their new Youth Ethics Advisory Board, a position crafted carefully, with legal consultants and PR staff, with a stipend and mentorship, and weekly lunches with board members. Naomi listened politely, her hands folded, her gaze steady, and then said the words that would echo in his ears for weeks. "Sir, I didn't speak up so I could sit at your table. I spoke because someone had to stop the silence." He blinked once, then nodded. Alyssa Monroe, seated nearby and silent until that point, smiled not with pride but with recognition. She knew that kind of strength, the kind that doesn't reach for power when it's finally within grasp because it understands the weight of what power costs when used without caution. Naomi left the room with a manila envelope tucked beneath her arm. Inside were legal copies of the evidence she'd helped bring to light and a formal agreement that she would be protected under whistleblower status. No reporters, no spotlight, just safety. She had asked for nothing else. That evening, at home, Camille Carter placed 2 mugs of peppermint tea on the table and sat across from her daughter. Her fingers were trembling, not from fear, but from something far older. Exhaustion, maybe, or the sense of watching a child become something the world might not deserve, but desperately needs. Naomi didn't say much, just sipped the tea slowly, thoughtfully, and after a while looked up and said, "I don't want them to remember me as the girl who saved a company. I want them to remember what the company was willing to ignore." Camille reached across the table and placed a hand over Naomi's. "They'll remember both," she said quietly, "because you didn't ask for power, and that's what makes your voice impossible to forget." And in that small apartment above the bakery, with its peeling paint and humming radiator and windows that fogged with the breath of night, Naomi understood something most people take a lifetime to learn. Sometimes the most radical act isn't winning, but walking away from the reward when it's offered too late and too easily. It wasn't a parade, there were no fireworks, no grand announcements echoing down city streets, but when Naomi Carter returned to school the week after the news broke, Langford Capital halting the merger, whistleblower protections issued, internal investigations launched, she noticed how the halls no longer whispered behind her, how some teachers paused longer at her name during roll call, and how even the security guard at the front gate nodded once, not in recognition of scandal, but in quiet respect. Her classmates didn't know what to say. Some still avoided her, not out of cruelty but discomfort, as if her truth had made the world slightly too sharp for their soft teenage armor. Others passed her notes folded twice, with words like "thank you" and "I didn't think anyone like us could ever speak up." She kept them all in a box beneath her bed, beside the copy of the contract she had first opened, the one that had almost destroyed a legacy and instead exposed a lie. At Langford Tower, things changed slowly, as they always do in institutions built on years of unspoken rules. The carpets were still gray, the emails still too polite, but the leadership team now read contracts 3 times before calling them final. Stephen Langford appointed Alyssa Monroe to lead a new ethics oversight committee. Gillian resigned before the board could vote. Carter Drew's firm fell under federal audit, and no one in that glass building ever again dismissed a janitor's daughter with a clipboard and a question. One morning, a reporter asked Naomi outside the school gates, microphone in hand, eyes bright with curiosity, "If you could go back, would you still have spoken up?" Naomi looked past him, toward the street, where her mother was waiting in a second-hand sedan that always wheezed before it started, and then said, not with drama but with certainty, "Yes, because someone needed to, and because I could." Camille Carter watched her daughter from the driver's seat, hand resting on the steering wheel, heart caught somewhere between pride and something quieter, something like awe. She remembered the nights she scrubbed floors while Naomi waited in the break room with library books too heavy for her backpack, and how she once told her daughter that dignity wasn't about titles, but about doing the right thing, even when no one clapped. Now the world was clapping, a little too late. Weeks passed. Naomi didn't seek attention. She still helped her mother fold laundry, still added extra salt to the mac and cheese, still sat by the window on weekends and read court documents with a highlighter like most girls her age, scrolled through music playlists. But one thing had changed. She knew now that her voice was not too small, that courage didn't require permission, that power could tremble before truth even if truth came in sneakers and borrowed blazers. And late one evening, as the sky over Atlanta turned the color of steel and the windows of Langford Tower caught the last light like broken glass being mended, Naomi pinned a single note to her bedroom wall. It read, in handwriting just slightly slanted from her grandfather's old habit, "Truth isn't loud, but it lasts." She didn't write it to be remembered. She wrote it to never forget.